The sun beat down mercilessly on the Nebraska plains as Katherine Campbell wiped the sweat from her brow, her cotton dress already soaked through despite the early hour. It was the summer of 1876, and the endless fields of golden wheat stretched before her like an ocean of gold, beautiful yet treacherous in the unforgiving heat. She had been walking for hours, determined to reach her aunt's homestead before nightfall, but the relentless sun and her dwindling water supply had taken their toll. Katherine stumbled, her vision blurring at the edges as dark spots danced before her eyes. She had been so certain taking the shortcut across White Ridge Field would save her time, but now she wasn't so sure. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tilt and sway like the deck of a ship caught in a storm. Just a little farther, she whispered to herself, her parched lips cracking with each word. But her body had other ideas. Her knees buckled beneath her, and Katherine felt herself falling, the golden wheat rising up to meet her as consciousness slipped away. Isaac Walsh paused in his work, straightening his aching back as he squinted against the harsh sunlight. At 26, he'd spent the better part of a decade working other people's land, saving every penny toward his dream of owning his own ranch someday. Today he was mending fence posts for Old Man Jenkins, whose arthritis had grown too painful for him to manage the repairs himself. Isaac reached for his canteen, taking a measured swig of the lukewarm water before returning to his task. He had only driven in a few more nails when something caught his eye, a flash of blue fabric amid the gold of the wheat field. He frowned, setting down his hammer and shading his eyes with his hand. There it was again, definitely not a trick of the light. Something or someone was out there in Jenkins' Southfield. "Hello," he called out, his voice carrying across the still afternoon air. No response came. Isaac hesitated only a moment before setting down his tools. He grabbed his hat from where it hung on a fence post and settled it firmly on his head before striding into the wheat field, the tall stalks brushing against his worn denim pants as he made his way toward the mysterious blue shape. What he found made his heart lurch in his chest. A young woman lay crumpled among the wheat, her blue dress spread around her like a fallen flower. Her face was flushed an alarming shade of red, and even unconscious, her expression was pinched with distress. Miss, can you hear me?" Isaac knelt beside her, gently touching her shoulder. When she didn't respond, he pressed his fingers to her neck, relieved to find a pulse rapid and thready, but present. Heat exhaustion, most likely. Isaac had seen it before, especially among those not accustomed to the brutal Nebraska summers. Without hesitation, he slipped one arm beneath her knees and the other around her shoulders, lifting her with care. She was light in his arms, her head lolling against his chest as he turned back toward the Jenkins farmhouse. "Hold on, miss," he murmured, quickening his pace. "I've got you now." The woman in his arms remained unresponsive, but Isaac could feel the shallow rise and fall of her chest against him. She was alive, at least, though her skin burned with fever. He glanced down at her face, young, maybe 20 or so, with delicate features and auburn hair that had mostly escaped its pins. She wasn't from around here. Isaac knew most folks within 20 miles, and he'd have remembered a face like hers. By the time he reached the Jenkins porch, his shirt was soaked with sweat, but he hadn't slowed his pace. He kicked at the door with his boot, calling out, "Mrs. Jenkins, need some help out here." Martha Jenkins appeared moments later, her weathered face creasing with concern as she took in the unconscious woman in Isaac's arms. "Good Lord, who's this poor child?" she asked, already holding the door wider for Isaac to enter. "Found her collapsed in the south wheat field," Isaac explained, carefully maneuvering through the doorway. "Heat's got her bad. Where should I put her?" "Spare room," Martha directed, already moving ahead of him to pull back the quilt on the bed. "Set her down gentle-like." Isaac laid the woman on the bed, stepping back as Martha took charge, her movements efficient despite her 60 years. "Fetch some cool water from the well, and those clean cloths from the kitchen," she instructed, her fingers already working at the buttons at the young woman's throat. "Poor thing's wearing far too many layers for this heat." Isaac nodded and hurried to fetch the requested items, giving the women privacy. When he returned with a bucket of well water and an armful of cloths, Martha had removed the woman's outer dress, leaving her in a light cotton shift. "She's suffering from the heat, something fierce," Martha said, taking the cloths from Isaac and soaking one in the cool water. Been walking a long way, judging by her boots. Isaac glanced down at the woman's feet, where Martha had removed a pair of scuffed leather boots. They were worn at the heels and covered in dust. Any idea who she might be? Martha asked, placing the cool cloth on the woman's forehead. Isaac shook his head. Never seen her before. Could be passing through to one of the western settlements. Well, whoever she is, she's in no state to go anywhere for a day or two. Martha wrung out another cloth and placed it on the woman's neck. You best fetch the doctor, just to be safe. Isaac nodded, casting one more glance at the mysterious woman before heading for the door. Something about her tugged at him. Perhaps it was the vulnerability of finding her alone in that field, or maybe it was something else entirely. Either way, he knew he wouldn't rest easy until he was certain she would recover. Dr. Miller arrived within the hour, his medical bag in hand, and a look of resigned determination on his face. After examining the young woman, he confirmed Martha's diagnosis of heat exhaustion. Keep her cool, get water into her when she wakes, and don't let her exert herself for at least 2 days, he instructed, packing up his stethoscope. She's young and appears healthy otherwise, so she should recover fully with proper care. We'll look after her, Martha assured him, walking him to the door. Isaac, who had been waiting anxiously on the porch, stood as the doctor emerged. She'll be fine, Dr. Miller told him, noting his concern. Just needs rest and plenty of fluids. Good thing you found her when you did, Walsh. Few more hours in that sun, and we might be having a different conversation. The thought sent a chill through Isaac despite the heat of the day. He nodded his thanks to the doctor and returned to the spare room, where Martha was adjusting the curtains to block the worst of the afternoon sun. You can go back to your fence mending, Martha told him with a knowing smile. I'll send Jenkins out to fetch you if there's any change. I'd rather stay, if it's all the same to you, Isaac replied, surprised by his own insistence. Just until she wakes. To make sure she's all right. Martha's smile widened slightly, but she didn't comment further. Instead, she handed him a fresh cloth and the water bucket. Keep these cool compresses on her, then. I need to start supper. Left alone with the unconscious woman, Isaac settled into the chair beside the bed, dutifully changing the cloth on her forehead whenever it grew warm. As the afternoon stretched on, he found himself studying her face, the gentle curve of her cheek, the small scattering of freckles across the bridge of her nose, the long lashes that rested against her skin. Who was she? Where had she come from? And where had she been going? The questions circled in his mind as the shadows lengthened across the room. It was nearing dusk when the woman finally stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, and a small moan escaped her lips. Isaac leaned forward, setting aside the cloth he'd been about to place on her forehead. Miss? Can you hear me? Her eyes opened, revealing irises the color of summer sky. For a moment, she stared at him uncomprehendingly, fear flickering across her features. It's all right, Isaac said quickly, keeping his voice gentle. You're safe. You collapsed in the field from the heat. I brought you to the Jenkins farm. The woman tried to speak, but her voice came out as a dry rasp. Isaac quickly poured water from the pitcher into a glass and helped her sit up enough to take a few sips. Thank you, she managed after a moment, her voice clearer but still weak. I don't remember what happened. Heat exhaustion, Isaac explained. Doctor says you'll be fine with rest. I'm Isaac Walsh, by the way. I work for Mr. Jenkins. Katherine Campbell, she replied, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I was on my way to my aunt's homestead near Cottonwood Creek. Isaac nodded in recognition. That's still a good 10 miles from here. Were you walking all that way? Katherine's cheeks flushed slightly, though whether from embarrassment or lingering fever, Isaac couldn't tell. The stagecoach only goes as far as Riverdale. I thought I could manage the rest on foot. In this heat, Isaac couldn't keep the incredulity from his voice. I didn't realize how far it truly was, she admitted. The map made it seem closer. Before Isaac could respond, Martha appeared in the doorway, a tray of food in her hands. Her face brightened when she saw Katherine awake. Well now, look who's back with us, she said warmly, setting the tray on the bedside table. How are you feeling, dear? Embarrassed, mostly, Katherine replied with a weak smile. And very grateful for your kindness. Nonsense. Any decent folk would do the same, Martha assured her, pressing a hand to Katherine's forehead. Still warm, but much better. Think you could manage some broth and bread? Katherine nodded, and Isaac stood to make room for Martha. I should get back to those fence posts before it's too dark, he said, suddenly feeling awkward in the small room. You'll do no such thing, Martha scolded. Jenkins finished the job himself hours ago. You'll stay for supper, and that's that. Isaac glanced at Katherine, who was watching him with those striking blue eyes. If you're sure I won't be imposing. The man who saved my life is welcome at any table of mine, Katherine said softly. Something in her gaze made Isaac's heart beat a little faster. He nodded, unable to find the right words in response, and stepped out to wash up for supper, wondering why the thought of leaving her side felt so strangely difficult. Over the next 2 days, Katherine regained her strength under Martha's attentive care. Isaac found reasons to visit the Jenkins farm far more frequently than usual, always bringing something with him: fresh wildflowers he'd spotted on his ride over, a book he thought she might enjoy during her convalescence, or news from town to help pass the time. Katherine, for her part, seemed equally pleased by his visits. She was quick-witted and well-spoken, having worked as a schoolteacher back east before deciding to join her widowed aunt in Nebraska territory. After my parents passed last winter, there was nothing keeping me in Pennsylvania, she explained on the afternoon of her second day at the Jenkins farm. She and Isaac sat on the porch, enjoying the slightly cooler air as evening approached. Aunt Margaret wrote that she could use the help, and I've always been curious about life out west. It's not what most Easterners expect, Isaac said, watching as she absently twisted a strand of auburn hair around her finger. Harder in some ways, simpler in others. I'm beginning to understand that, Katherine replied with a rueful smile. Though I still have much to learn, clearly. Like not crossing open fields at high noon in the middle of summer? Isaac teased gently. Katherine laughed, the sound light and musical. Yes, that would be at the top of the list. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of understanding, of connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Isaac felt his breath catch slightly, and he was about to speak when Martha called them in for supper. The moment passed, but its effect lingered in Isaac's mind throughout the evening and into the next day. By the third morning, Dr. Miller declared Katherine fit to travel, though he advised against her walking to her aunt's homestead. I'd be happy to take you, Isaac offered immediately. I've got my wagon, and it would be no trouble to drive you to Cottonwood Creek. The smile Katherine gave him in response warmed him more thoroughly than the summer sun. I would appreciate that very much, Mr. Walsh. Isaac, he corrected. Just Isaac. Isaac, she repeated, his name sounding different, special somehow in her gentle voice. Thank you. They set out the following morning, Katherine's small traveling trunk secured in the back of Isaac's wagon. She had insisted on paying him for the journey, but Isaac had firmly refused. Consider it my welcome gift to our little corner of Nebraska, he told her as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. The journey to Cottonwood Creek would take most of the day, giving them ample time to talk. As the miles passed beneath the wagon wheels, Isaac found himself sharing stories of his life that he rarely spoke of: his childhood in Ohio, his decision to head west at 18 with dreams of building something of his own, the struggles and small triumphs of the past 8 years. Katherine listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that showed she truly cared about understanding him. In turn, she shared more about her life as a teacher, her love of literature, and her hope of possibly starting a small school once she was settled at her aunt's. The nearest proper school is in Riverdale, Isaac told her. Plenty of families around Cottonwood Creek would welcome education closer to home. Do you think so? Katherine asked, her eyes brightening with enthusiasm. I wasn't sure if there would be interest. Folks out here value learning as much as anywhere, Isaac assured her. Maybe more, since it's harder to come by. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Martha had packed for them. Finding a shady spot beneath a cluster of cottonwood trees near a small stream, they spread a blanket on the grass and enjoyed the simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. It's beautiful here, Katherine observed, gazing out at the rolling landscape. Different from Pennsylvania, but beautiful in its own way. Isaac followed her gaze, seeing the familiar terrain through new eyes. It grows on you, he agreed. First time I saw the prairie, I thought it looked empty. Now I see all the life in it: the birds, the grasses, the way the wind moves across it like water. Katherine turned to him with a smile that made his heart skip. You have a poet's soul, Isaac Walsh. He felt his cheeks warm. Don't let that get around. Might ruin my reputation as a hard-working ranch hand. She laughed, and Isaac found himself thinking he could listen to that sound every day for the rest of his life without tiring of it, a thought that both thrilled and terrified him with its sudden clarity. They reached Cottonwood Creek by late afternoon. Margaret Campbell's homestead sat on a gentle rise overlooking the creek, a modest but well-maintained cabin with a small barn and corral behind it. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a gray-haired woman emerged onto the porch as they approached, shading her eyes against the sun. Katherine, she called, her voice carrying across the yard. Is that you, child? Aunt Margaret. Katherine waved, her face lighting up with joy. As soon as Isaac brought the wagon to a halt, she was scrambling down, rushing to embrace the older woman. Isaac hung back, giving them a moment of reunion as they hugged and exclaimed over each other. Then Katherine turned, gesturing for him to join them. Aunt Margaret, this is Isaac Walsh, she said, her eyes shining. He saved my life when I foolishly attempted to walk all the way from Riverdale. Margaret Campbell was a sturdy woman with the same striking blue eyes as her niece and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Isaac of his own mother. Saved her life, did you? She said, eyeing him appraisingly. Then you'll be staying for supper, at the very least. Isaac opened his mouth to politely decline, not wanting to impose, but found himself saying, I'd be honored, madam. Instead, unable to resist the hopeful look in Katherine's eyes. Supper turned into an invitation to stay the night. As the hour grew late and Margaret insisted it was too dangerous for him to make the return journey in the dark, Isaac found himself settled on a pallet in the small front room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Campbell homestead as he drifted toward sleep. He had planned to leave at first light, to return to his regular duties and routine. Instead, he found himself accepting Margaret's request to help repair her leaking roof, a task that somehow stretched into helping mend the chicken coop, reinforcing the corral fence, and clearing a small patch for Katherine's planned vegetable garden. You don't have to do all this, Katherine told him on the third afternoon, as they worked side by side turning over soil for the garden. I know, Isaac replied simply, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. I want to. Their eyes met, and Isaac knew he wasn't fooling either of them. He stayed because he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her. Each day in her company only deepened his fascination with her quick mind, her gentle heart, her determination to build a new life in this challenging place. By the end of the week, Isaac had run out of excuses to remain at the Campbell homestead. He stood beside his wagon at dawn, hat in hand, as Katherine and Margaret came to see him off. I can't thank you enough for all your help, Margaret said, pressing a package of food into his hands for the journey. You've done the work of 3 men in half the time. It was my pleasure, madam, Isaac replied, his eyes drifting to Katherine, who stood slightly apart, her expression carefully composed. Margaret, perceptive as she was, made a show of remembering something she'd left inside, leaving the two of them alone. Will you come back to visit? Katherine asked once her aunt had gone, her voice softer than usual. Isaac nodded, his throat suddenly tight. If you'd like me to. I would, she said simply. Very much. Impulsively, he reached for her hand, his calloused fingers closing gently around her smaller ones. Sunday, he promised. I'll come for Sunday dinner, if that's agreeable. Her smile was like sunrise breaking across the prairie. We'll be expecting you. True to his word, Isaac returned that Sunday, and the next, and the one after that. Summer faded into autumn, and his visits became a regular fixture in the rhythm of life at the Campbell homestead. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a book he'd found in town that reminded him of her, honey from a neighboring farm, or wildflowers gathered along the way. Katherine blossomed in her new home, quickly becoming a beloved figure in the scattered community. True to her plan, she started a small school, teaching the children from 3 neighboring homesteads in Margaret's front room 3 days a week. On his visits, Isaac often found himself enlisted to help build simple desks or shelves for books, tasks he undertook with willing hands and a full heart. As October painted the prairie in golds and russets, Isaac finally gathered his courage one crisp Sunday afternoon. He had asked Katherine to walk with him down to the creek after dinner, and she had readily agreed, wrapping a woolen shawl around her shoulders against the autumn chill. They walked in comfortable silence for a time, the fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. At the creek bank, they paused to watch the water flow past, sparkling in the late afternoon sun. "Katherine," Isaac began, his heart hammering against his ribs. "These past months have been the happiest of my life." She turned to him, her cheeks pink from the cool air and perhaps something more. "Mine too," she said softly. Encouraged, Isaac took her hands in his. "I've been saving for years to buy my own place. There's land for sale just 2 miles east of here, good land, with water and timber. I've nearly got enough for the down payment." Catherine's eyes widened slightly, hope and uncertainty mingling in their blue depths. "Isaac, what I'm trying to say badly, I'm afraid, is that I love you, Katherine Campbell. I've loved you since I carried you out of that wheat field, though I didn't know it then." He took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage he possessed. "I'm asking if you might consider a future with me as my wife, building a life together on that piece of land." For one terrible moment, Katherine was silent, her expression unreadable. Then, to Isaac's astonishment, tears welled in her eyes. "Katherine," he asked, fear clutching at his heart. "I'm sorry if I've spoken too soon." "No," she interrupted, shaking her head even as she smiled through her tears. "No, you haven't spoken too soon. Yes, Isaac. Yes, I will marry you." Joy burst through him like wildfire, and he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. Her laughter rang out across the creek as he spun her around, both of them dizzy with happiness when he finally set her down. "I love you," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face with trembling fingers. "I think I've loved you since I opened my eyes and saw you sitting beside my bed, looking so worried and so kind." Isaac bent his head and kissed her then, a gentle meeting of lips that held the promise of all the years to come. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church in Riverdale, with Margaret beaming proudly and neighbors for miles around in attendance. The winter weather cooperated, providing a light dusting of snow that made everything look magical without making travel impossible. Katherine wore a dress of deep blue velvet that matched her eyes, with a crown of winter holly berries in her auburn hair. Isaac, in his one good suit, thought he had never seen anything so beautiful as his bride walking toward him down the church's center aisle. They spent their first night as husband and wife in the small hotel in Riverdale, shy and tender with each other as they discovered the physical expression of their love. In the morning, they rode together in Isaac's wagon to their new home, the piece of land he had spoken of by the creek, where he had been secretly building a small cabin in every spare moment throughout the autumn. It was a modest beginning, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, but to Katherine, it was perfect. They crossed the threshold together, Isaac carrying her over it in the traditional manner, both of them laughing as he nearly bumped her head on the doorframe. Winter passed in a blur of contentment, the newlyweds cozy in their small cabin as snow piled high outside. They established routines and rhythms, learning the intimate dance of sharing a life. Isaac continued to work for neighboring ranchers while developing their own land, and Katherine maintained her small school, though she now taught from their cabin rather than her aunt's. By spring, they had expanded the cabin by 1 room and planted their first crops. Katherine tended a vegetable garden that promised to feed them well through the coming year, and Isaac built a sturdy corral for the 2 horses and 4 cows that now constituted their modest herd. As summer approached once more, Katherine had news that brought tears of joy to Isaac's eyes. They would welcome a child with the harvest. The pregnancy made her more careful in the summer heat, Isaac insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day and never walk far without him accompanying her. "You're fussing," she would tell him with fond exasperation as he brought her yet another cup of cool water or adjusted the curtains to better shade her from the sun. "I'm being sensible," he would counter, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'm not taking any chances with you fainting in fields again. That worked out rather well for me the first time," she teased. "Even so," Isaac replied, his hand resting gently on the slight swell of her belly. "Once was quite enough." Their daughter, Margaret Rose Walsh, was born on a clear September night with her grandmother Campbell and the local midwife in attendance. Isaac paced the length of their small cabin, heart in his throat, until the midwife finally called him in to meet his child. Katherine lay propped against the pillows, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly as Isaac approached the bed with reverent steps. The tiny face that peered up at him from the blankets stole his breath away, perfect rosebud lips, a button nose, and a wisp of auburn hair that promised she would favor her mother. When her tiny hand wrapped around his finger, Isaac felt tears slip down his cheeks, unashamed of his emotion. "She's perfect," he whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and sliding his arm around Catherine's shoulders. Just like her mother. Life settled into a new pattern with little Margaret, whom they called Maggie, at the center of their world. The challenges of prairie life remained, but they faced them together, finding joy in their growing family and the home they were building. Their second child, a son they named William James, arrived 2 years later, bringing a new kind of balance to their family. Maggie, at 2, was fascinated by her baby brother, watching over him with solemn attention that made her parents hide smiles behind their hands. The years rolled by, marked by the rhythms of the seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Isaac's small herd grew into a respectable cattle operation, and Catherine's school expanded to a proper one-room schoolhouse built by the community on land they donated at the edge of their property. There were hard times, the year of drought that nearly broke them. The winter William fell ill with pneumonia, and they feared for his life, the fire that destroyed their barn and had to be rebuilt from scratch. But through it all, they had each other, their love a constant anchor in life's storms. On the 10th anniversary of the day Isaac had found Katherine in the wheat field, they stood together on their front porch, watching Maggie and William chase fireflies in the twilight. Isaac's arm rested comfortably around Catherine's waist, her head leaning against his shoulder in the easy intimacy of long marriage. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Katherine asked softly. "If I hadn't fainted that day, or if you hadn't been working on that particular fence?" Isaac considered the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other somehow," he said finally. "Some things are just meant to be." Katherine turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that 10 years of prairie sun and wind had etched around his eyes. He was still handsome to her, perhaps more so now than when they'd first met, his features made dearer by shared joys and sorrows. "I think you're right," she agreed, stretching up to kiss him softly. "But I'm grateful it happened the way it did." "As am I," Isaac murmured against her lips. "Every day I'm grateful." They stood together as darkness fell completely, calling the children in for bed, secure in the life they had built together, a life that had begun on a scorching summer day when a woman grew faint crossing a field, and a cowboy set down his tools and carried her home. 5 years later, the Walsh ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the region. Isaac's careful management and forward-thinking methods had paid off, allowing them to expand their holdings and build a larger home for their growing family. They now had 4 children. Maggie and William had been joined by twins Sarah and Joseph 3 years prior, bringing joyful chaos to the household. Katherine divided her time between teaching at the schoolhouse and managing their bustling home. Though she sometimes missed the simplicity of their early years together, she wouldn't trade the life they'd built for anything in the world. On a warm spring afternoon, Katherine stood in their kitchen, kneading bread dough with practiced hands while the twins napped and the older children were still at school. Through the window, she could see Isaac in the distance, working with a new colt in the training corral. Even after 15 years, the sight of him still made her heart beat faster. The sound of hoofbeats in the yard pulled her from her thoughts. Wiping her hands on her apron, Katherine moved to the door, curious about the unexpected visitor. A young man sat atop a lathered horse, his expression urgent. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm sorry to trouble you, but is your husband around? There's been an accident at the Miller Place barn. Roof collapsed. They need help getting Sam out from under the beams." Catherine's heart clenched with worry for their neighbor. "I'll fetch him right away," she promised, already moving toward the corral. Isaac didn't hesitate when she called to him, immediately securing the colt and rushing to saddle his own horse. "Keep the children close to home," he told her, pressing a quick kiss to her cheek before mounting up. "I don't know how long this will take." Katherine nodded, watching as he and the messenger galloped away, dust rising in their wake. She returned to the kitchen, finishing the bread with mechanical movements, her mind on the Millers and their possible tragedy. Hours passed with no word. Katherine managed to keep her worry from the children when they returned from school, focusing instead on helping with homework and preparing supper. But as darkness fell with still no sign of Isaac, her concern deepened. She had just settled the children to bed when she heard horses in the yard. Rushing to the door, Katherine was relieved to see Isaac dismounting, though her relief quickly turned to alarm at the sight of his blood-stained shirt and exhausted posture. "Isaac, are you hurt?" she asked, hurrying down the porch steps to meet him. He shook his head, leading his tired horse toward the barn. "Not my blood. Sam's in a bad way, but Doc Miller thinks he'll pull through. We got him out into the house." Katherine followed him into the barn, watching as he cared for his horse with gentle efficiency despite his obvious fatigue. "What happened?" "Rot in the support beams that wasn't visible," Isaac explained, his voice rough with weariness. "Sam was up checking the roof after the spring rains, and the whole thing just gave way beneath him. If his boy hadn't been there to run for help." He trailed off, the implications clear. Once the horse was settled, Katherine led Isaac back to the house, where she had kept water heating on the stove. She helped him wash away the dust and blood, her touch gentle as she assessed him for hidden injuries despite his protests that he was fine. "I was so worried," she admitted as they sat together at the kitchen table, a late supper before them. "When you didn't come back before dark." Isaac reached across the table to take her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "I'm sorry. I should have sent word." "No, you were where you needed to be," Katherine said, squeezing his hand in return. "Is there anything we can do for the Millers? I could take over some food tomorrow, or help with their children while Mary tends to Sam." Isaac smiled, his eyes warming with love. "I already told them you'd be by. They'll need all the help they can get for a while." Katherine nodded, unsurprised. After 15 years together, they could often anticipate each other's thoughts and intentions. It was one of the many gifts of their marriage, that deep understanding that had grown between them over the years. Later that night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Katherine nestled against Isaac's side, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her. "I was thinking today about how quickly things can change," she murmured. One moment Sam was doing an ordinary task, and the next, his life was in danger. Isaac's hand moved in slow circles on her back, soothing and present. "That's the nature of life out here. Always has been." "It made me realize again how precious each day is," Katherine continued. "How grateful I am for every moment we have together." Isaac shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her, his face barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. "What's brought this on?" Katherine hesitated, then decided there was no point in waiting to share her news. I'm fairly certain we're going to have another baby." For a moment, Isaac was still, absorbing her words. Then he gathered her close, his embrace gentle but fierce. "Katherine," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you sure?" She nodded against his chest. "Almost certain. It's early yet, but I know the signs well enough by now." Isaac's hand moved to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. "Another child," he said wonderingly. "I thought perhaps we were done after the twins." "So did I," Katherine admitted with a small laugh. "But it seems life had other plans." "The best plans," Isaac said firmly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Are you happy about it?" "I am," she assured him, a bit daunted by the prospect of 5 children. "But yes, I'm happy." They lay together in contented silence for a while, both contemplating the changes this new life would bring to their family. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that day in the field?" Isaac asked suddenly. Katherine considered the question, as she had many times over the years. "I used to in the early days. But now, it seems impossible that we wouldn't have found each other somehow. As if all the paths my life could have taken would have led to you eventually." Isaac's arms tightened around her. "That's a comforting thought. That some things are simply meant to be." "It is," Katherine agreed, feeling sleep beginning to claim her. "And this life we've built together that was meant to be too. The best life I could have imagined," Isaac murmured, his own voice heavy with approaching sleep. "And it all started because you couldn't handle the Nebraska heat." Katherine laughed softly, pinching his side in mock offense. "And because you were gallant enough to come to my rescue." "Best decision I ever made," Isaac said, the words slurring slightly as he drifted toward sleep. "Carrying you home that day. It became my home too," Katherine whispered, but Isaac was already asleep, his breathing deep and even against her hair. Their fifth child, Eleanor Grace, arrived in the early hours of a winter morning, bringing joy to the Walsh household despite the bitter cold outside. She was a peaceful baby with Isaac's dark hair and Katherine's blue eyes, adored by her older siblings who vied for the privilege of holding her. Life adjusted once more to accommodate their newest addition. The older children took on more responsibilities, with 13-year-old Maggie proving herself particularly capable of helping with the younger ones. William, at 11, was becoming Isaac's right hand on the ranch, showing a natural affinity for working with the animals. As Eleanor's first birthday approached, Katherine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. 20 years had passed since that fateful day in the wheat field, 20 years of love, hard work, joy, and occasional sorrow. They had weathered droughts and blizzards, economic downturns and personal losses, including Margaret Campbell's peaceful passing 5 years earlier. Through it all, their love had remained steadfast, deepening with each challenge faced together. Isaac's hair now showed threads of silver at the temples, and Katherine's once slender figure had softened with the bearing of 5 children, but the way they looked at each other had not changed. On the evening of Eleanor's first birthday, after the celebration with neighbors and friends had ended and the children were finally asleep, Katherine and Isaac sat together on the porch swing, a quilt draped across their laps against the evening chill. 20 years, Isaac mused, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you in that field. And sometimes it feels like we've always been together," Katherine replied, leaning into his solid warmth. "As if my life before you was just preparation for the real thing." Isaac chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "Quite the romantic notion, Mrs. Walsh." "You've made me so," she countered with a smile. "Who would have thought that taciturn cowboy who carried me home would turn out to have such a tender heart? Only for you," Isaac said, his voice softening. "Always for you." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Do you have any regrets?" Katherine asked suddenly. "About the path we've taken?" Isaac considered the question with his usual thoughtfulness. "Not about us," he said finally. "Never about us. Sometimes I wonder if we should have taken more risks with the ranch, expanded faster when we had the chance. Or if we should have moved to town when the children were smaller, made things easier on you." Katherine shook her head. "I've loved raising our family here. Watching them grow up with space to run and explore, learning the value of hard work alongside you." She paused, then added softly, "My only regret is that my parents never got to meet you or the children." Isaac pressed a kiss to her temple. "They would be proud of the woman you've become. The teacher, the mother, the heart of this family. And your parents would be proud of you," Katherine returned. "Building all this from nothing but your own determination." "Not nothing," Isaac corrected gently. "I had you beside me every step of the way." Inside the house, Eleanor's cry broke the peaceful moment. Katherine made to rise, but Isaac stopped her with a gentle hand. "I'll go," he said, standing and stretching his back. "You rest." Katherine watched him go, love swelling in her heart as she observed the care with which this strong man, who could break a wild horse and haul heavy fence posts without complaint, now tended to their infant daughter. Within moments, Eleanor's cries quieted, replaced by the low, soothing rumble of Isaac's voice as he sang one of the lullabies he had learned for their first child and sung to each one since. Life wasn't perfect, Katherine reflected as she gazed up at the star-filled Nebraska sky. There were still challenges ahead, raising 5 children to adulthood, navigating the changing economic landscape of the West, and facing whatever personal trials might come their way. But with Isaac beside her, she felt equal to whatever the future might hold. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Maggie, their firstborn, married a young lawyer from Riverdale and moved to Omaha, returning for visits with increasing frequency as her own family began to grow. William took over more responsibility on the ranch, proving himself every bit as capable as his father. The twins, Sarah and Joseph, showed different inclinations. Sarah toward medicine, having been inspired by Doc Miller's care during a childhood illness, and Joseph toward education, following in his mother's footsteps. Eleanor, their youngest, grew into a spirited young woman with her father's quiet strength and her mother's love of books. At 18, she was the only one still at home full-time, though the others returned regularly, filling the house with laughter and the ever-growing number of grandchildren. On the 30th anniversary of the day Isaac had found Katherine in the wheat field, they held a grand celebration. Children, grandchildren, and friends from miles around gathered at the Walsh Ranch to honor the couple whose love story had become something of a legend in the community. The day was filled with food, music, and reminiscences. Old neighbors recalled how they had wagered on how long it would take Isaac to propose after that first Sunday dinner at Margaret Campbell's homestead. The children shared embarrassing stories of their parents' unabashed affection for each other throughout their childhood. As evening fell, lanterns were lit in the yard, and someone called for Isaac and Katherine to dance. Despite his protests that his dancing days were long behind him, Isaac allowed himself to be pulled to the center of the gathering, Katherine's hand warm in his. As they moved together to the simple melody played on fiddle and guitar, the years seemed to fall away. Katherine looked up into the face of the man she had loved for 3 decades, seeing both the young cowboy who had carried her to safety and the steadfast partner who had carried her through life. "Happy anniversary, my love," she said softly, for his ears alone. Isaac's arms tightened around her, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled down at her. "Best 30 years of my life," he replied, "though I'm looking forward to the next 30 even more. Are you now?" Katherine teased, her own smile reflecting his. "Rather optimistic of you, Mr. Walsh." "Always have been," he returned easily. "Had to be, to think a beautiful, educated woman like you would agree to marry a simple cowboy like me." "Not so simple," Katherine corrected, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. "The wisest, kindest man I've ever known." Around them, their family and friends continued the celebration, but in that moment, they might have been alone, locked in the private world of their enduring love. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the younger generation had taken charge of the cleanup, Isaac and Katherine walked hand in hand to the eastern edge of their property. The full moon illuminated the landscape, silvering the prairie grasses that swayed gently in the night breeze. They stopped at the spot where they had built a small memorial to Margaret Campbell years earlier, a simple stone bench beneath a cottonwood tree, with a view of the creek that had given the area its name. Sitting together on the bench, they leaned against each other, comfortable in the silence that comes from decades of shared experience. "I was thinking today about all the different ways our lives might have gone," Isaac said finally, his voice thoughtful in the darkness. "If you hadn't decided to come west, or if I'd been working elsewhere that day, or if I'd been more sensible about walking in the summer heat," Katherine added with a small laugh. "I'm rather glad you weren't," Isaac admitted, squeezing her hand. "Your moment of poor judgment changed the course of my life in the best possible way." Katherine rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his soap and leather and the indefinable essence that was simply Isaac. "Mine too," she murmured, "though I maintain that fainting at your feet was not my finest hour." "I disagree," Isaac said, his tone light but sincere. "I think it was the beginning of all our finest hours." They sat together a while longer, reminiscing about the 3 decades they had shared and speculating about what the future might hold for their children and grandchildren. The world was changing rapidly around them. Automobiles were replacing horses, electricity was coming to even remote areas, and the wild west of their youth was increasingly tamed. Yet some things remained constant, like the love that had sustained them through 30 years of marriage. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, Isaac stood and offered Katherine his hand. "Shall we go home, Mrs. Walsh?" he asked, just as he had thousands of times over the years. Katherine placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Yes, Mr. Walsh," she replied with a smile. "Let's go home." Hand in hand, they walked back toward the house they had built together, their silhouettes merging into one against the moonlit prairie. Behind them, the cottonwood leaves rustled gently, as if whispering approval of the journey. They had shared a journey that had begun on a sweltering summer day when a woman grew faint crossing a field, and a cowboy set down his tools and carried her home. As their 40th anniversary approached, life had slowed somewhat for Isaac and Katherine. The ranch was now primarily William's responsibility, though Isaac still insisted on helping with the daily chores despite his 70 years. Katherine had retired from teaching several years earlier, but remained active in community affairs and doted on her 14 grandchildren. Eleanor, their youngest, had married a professor from the university in Lincoln and presented them with twin granddaughters the previous spring. The family joke was that the Walsh tendency toward twins had skipped a generation, manifesting in their youngest daughter instead of Sarah and Joseph. One crisp autumn morning, Katherine stood at the kitchen window, watching as Isaac crossed the yard toward the barn. His steps were slower than in his youth, his back not quite as straight, but he still moved with purpose and dignity. Her heart swelled with the familiar love that had been her constant companion for 4 decades. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. She opened it to find a young woman standing on the porch, perhaps in her early 20s, with a hesitant smile and curious eyes. "Mrs. Walsh," the young woman asked. "I'm Elizabeth Chambers. I'm sorry to intrude, but I was hoping I might speak with you and Mr. Walsh." Katherine studied the unfamiliar face, noting a certain quality to the girl's features that tugged at her memory. "Of course, dear. Please come in. My husband will be back shortly." As she ushered the visitor into the parlor and busied herself making tea, Katherine tried to place why the young woman seemed somehow familiar. When Isaac returned from the barn and joined them, his puzzled expression suggested he felt the same vague recognition. "Thank you both for seeing me," Elizabeth began, setting her teacup carefully on its saucer. "I'm not sure if you remember my grandmother, Sarah Miller?" Isaac straightened in his chair. "Sam Miller's wife? Of course we remember Sarah. She passed some years back, didn't she?" Elizabeth nodded. "Yes, 5 years ago. But before she died, she gave me this and asked me to bring it to you when I was older." She reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. She said it was important, but that there was no hurry. With a puzzled glance at Katherine, Isaac accepted the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in faded handwriting. As he read, his expression changed from confusion to astonishment. "Isaac," Katherine prompted, concern coloring her voice. "What is it?" Instead of answering, he handed her the letter. Katherine read it quickly, her hand rising to cover her mouth as the words sank in. "I don't understand," she said finally, looking up at their visitor with new eyes. "This says that Sarah Miller was there the day Isaac found me in the field. But that can't be right. She would have only been a child." 15, Elizabeth confirmed. She was 15 that summer, working in the Jenkins kitchen to earn money for her family. She saw everything from the kitchen window, but was too shy to come out when you brought Mrs. Walsh inside. "She never told anyone except my mother and me." Isaac shook his head, struggling to reconcile this new information with his memories. "But why tell us now, after all these years?" Elizabeth's smile was gentle. "Grandmother said your love story was the most romantic thing she ever witnessed. She watched it unfold from a distance, how you visited Mrs. Walsh every day during her recovery, how your face lit up whenever she entered a room. She said it gave her hope during a difficult time in her life, and she wanted you to know that your love touched others in ways you never realized." Katherine felt tears welling in her eyes. She reached for Isaac's hand, finding it already reaching for hers. That's a wonderful gift," she managed to say. "Thank you for bringing this to us." They invited Elizabeth to stay for lunch, eager to hear more about Sarah Miller's recollections of those early days. As the young woman spoke, Katherine found herself transported back to that summer, seeing it through fresh eyes, not just as a participant in her own love story, but as part of a larger tapestry of community and connection. After Elizabeth departed with promises to visit again, Katherine and Isaac sat together on the porch swing, the letter resting on Katherine's lap. 40 years, Isaac mused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "And there are still new things to discover about how we began. It makes me wonder what other moments of our lives have touched people without our knowing," Katherine replied thoughtfully. "The ripples we create without realizing it." Isaac nodded, his gaze drifting to the distant fields where their story had begun. "It's humbling to think about. And comforting, in a way," Katherine added. "To know that love doesn't exist in isolation, that it spreads outward, touching others." They sat in contemplative silence as the afternoon waned, each lost in memories of the decades they had shared. Eventually, Isaac spoke again, his voice soft with emotion. "I've been thinking about our anniversary next month," he said. 40 years is quite a milestone. Katherine smiled, leaning into his side. "Indeed it is. Did you have something special in mind?" "I was thinking we might recreate that day," Isaac suggested, a hint of mischief in his tone. "You could walk across the south field. I could happen to be working nearby." Katherine laughed, the sound as musical at 70 as it had been at 20. "And would you carry me all the way back to the house, old man?" "I might surprise you," Isaac retorted with mock indignation. "I'm not in my grave yet." "Thank heavens for that," Katherine said, her laughter fading into something more serious. "I'm not ready to be without you, Isaac Walsh. Not for many years yet." His arm tightened around her shoulders. "Nor I you, my love. We've still got adventures ahead, you and I." As if to underscore his words, the sound of hoofbeats announced the arrival of William and his eldest son, returning from town with supplies. Behind them rode Joseph, visiting from the school where he now taught, deep in conversation with his nephew. The sight of 3 generations of Walsh men riding together brought a smile to Katherine's face. This was their legacy, not just the ranch they had built or the children they had raised, but the love that had sustained them through it all, a love that had touched others in ways they were only beginning to understand. "You're right," she told Isaac, watching as their family dismounted in the yard below. "The best adventures may still be ahead." "They always are," Isaac agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "As long as we're together." The day of their 40th anniversary dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the celebration they had planned. The entire extended family had gathered at the ranch, along with friends and neighbors from miles around. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by daughters, daughters-in-law, and granddaughters working together in the kitchen that had been Katherine's domain for so many years. But before the festivities began, Isaac and Katherine slipped away for a private moment together. They walked hand in hand to the south field where their story had begun, now part of their son William's expanded operation, but still recognizable to them both. "Shall we?" Isaac asked with a twinkle in his eye, gesturing toward the field. Katherine laughed but played along, stepping into the wheat while Isaac pretended to be absorbed in mending an imaginary fence. She walked a short distance, then dramatically pressed the back of her hand to her forehead. "Oh my," she called out in an exaggerated voice. "I fear the heat is too much for my delicate constitution." Isaac turned, struggling to maintain a serious expression. "Fear not, fair maiden," he called back. "Your knight in dusty denim approaches." He strode toward her with purpose, moving more spryly than his 70 years might suggest. When he reached her, Katherine pretended to swoon, falling with theatrical grace into his waiting arms. For a moment, they both dissolved into laughter, the absurdity of their play-acting too much to maintain. But as their laughter subsided, Isaac gazed down at Katherine with such tenderness that her breath caught. "I would still carry you anywhere," he said softly. "Through any field, across any distance." "I know," Katherine replied, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "You've been carrying me through life for 40 years, Isaac Walsh." Then, to her astonishment, Isaac adjusted his grip and straightened, lifting her fully into his arms. "Isaac," she protested. "Your back is fine," he assured her, beginning to walk slowly but steadily back toward the house. "I've been practicing when you weren't looking. William's been helping me build up my strength again." "You impossible man," Katherine said, torn between concern and delight. "Put me down before you hurt yourself." "Not a chance," Isaac replied, his breathing only slightly labored. "This is tradition." He carried her to the edge of the field before carefully setting her on her feet, both of them flushed with exertion and emotion. "There," he said with satisfaction. 40 years later, and I can still carry my bride." Katherine shook her head, blinking back tears of happiness. "You never cease to amaze me, Isaac Walsh." "Good," he replied simply. "I plan to keep it that way for however many years we have left." They returned to the house to find their family searching for them, the celebration ready to begin. The day passed in a blur of joy-shared meals, stories, laughter, and the pure pleasure of being surrounded by the family they had created together. As evening fell, William called for everyone's attention, raising his glass in a toast to his parents. "To Mom and Dad," he began, his voice strong across the gathering. who taught us what love looks like in action. Not just in grand gestures, though Dad carrying Mom across a field certainly qualifies. This earned appreciative laughter from the crowd. But in the thousand small ways they've cared for each other and for us every day for 40 years. To Isaac and Katherine, added Maggie, raising her own glass, who built not just a ranch, but a home that has sheltered generations. To Grandma and Grandpa, chimed in their eldest granddaughter, now a poised young woman of 22, who still look at each other like love-struck teenagers. More toasts followed, each more heartfelt than the last, until Katherine found herself wiping away tears and Isaac's hand gripped hers with emotion-filled pressure. When the toasts concluded, someone called for music, and soon the yard was filled with the sounds of fiddle and guitar, much as it had been on their 30th anniversary. This time, however, it was William who led his mother onto the makeshift dance floor, while Maggie claimed her father. As they danced, Katherine watched Isaac over her son's shoulder, her heart full to bursting with love for the man who had been her constant companion through 40 years of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. When the music changed, William smoothly passed her to Isaac's waiting arms, and they found themselves dancing together once more. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Walsh," Isaac murmured, holding her close. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Walsh," Katherine returned, her voice soft with emotion. "Thank you for carrying me home that day." "Best decision I ever made," Isaac replied, the words familiar from countless repetitions over the years, yet never losing their sincerity. As they moved together under the stars, surrounded by the family they had created and the community they had helped build, Katherine reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with that simple act of kindness. A woman had grown faint crossing a field, and a cowboy had set down his tools and carried her home, and in doing so, had carried her into a life more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. The music played on, and Isaac and Katherine Walsh danced beneath the prairie stars, their love story continuing to unfold with each step, each touch, each shared glance a testament to the enduring power of a love that had begun in the most unexpected of ways and had flourished for 40 golden years. As they celebrated their 50th anniversary, surrounded by 5 generations of the family they had created together, Isaac and Katherine Walsh looked back on their remarkable journey with grateful hearts. Their hair was now silver, their steps slower, but the love that bound them remained as strong as ever, perhaps stronger for having weathered a half-century of life's storms and sunshine. The celebration was quieter than their 40th had been, a concession to their advancing years, but no less joyful. Great-grandchildren played in the yard where their children had once romped, their laughter a sweet reminder of life's continuing cycle. As evening fell and the younger generations took charge of cleaning up, Isaac and Katherine sat together on the porch swing that had been their favorite spot for contemplation throughout the decades. 50 years, Katherine mused, her hand resting comfortably in Isaac's. Who would have thought that fainting in a wheat field would lead to all of this? Isaac's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Best thing that ever happened to me, you swooning at my feet." "I did not swoon," Katherine protested with mock indignation. "I succumbed to heat exhaustion. There's a difference." "If you say so, my love," Isaac replied, his tone indulgent. "Either way, I'm grateful for it." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their love story from its beginning. "Do you have any regrets?" Katherine asked softly, echoing a question she had posed years earlier. "About our life together?" Isaac considered, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on the back of her hand. "Only that we don't have another 50 years ahead of us," he said finally. "But even knowing that our time is growing shorter, I wouldn't change a day of the past 50 years. Katherine leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "Nor would I," she whispered. "Not a single day." Inside the house, a great-grandchild's cry punctuated the evening quiet, followed by the soothing murmur of a parent's voice. Life continued its eternal cycle, flowing outward from the love that had begun between a woman who grew faint crossing a field and the cowboy who had set down his tools and carried her home. And in that moment, surrounded by the fruits of their long love and the memories of a lifetime shared, Isaac and Katherine Walsh knew with certainty that they had lived exactly the life they were meant to live together.